Hi everybody, and welcome to Module 1 of Inclusion of Students with Special Needs. So this module begins on Tuesday, July 5th, 2016, and will run through Sunday, July 10th. So let's talk a little bit about Module 1. First of all, there is a video of Kevin, who works at Home Depot. He's been there for 20 years. And take time to watch that video and just think about Kevin and inclusion. One of the things that personally I like a lot about that video is Kevin is extremely resourceful. If I were to go into Home Depot and say, I need this type of, these types of screws for this type of project, he'd be able to take you right to where that was. Versus having him in a greeter type role, actually looking at what his capacity is. A lot of people with cerebral palsy have normal intellect, and I think you can see that when the interview is done with Kevin. But take a look at that. It really is, I think, an inspiring video. Make sure that you complete the Module 1 checklist and that you're posting your introduction by July 5th, first day of class. So that needs to be up. You can respond to other people's introductions. Feel free to post a picture. That's fine. This week you're going to learn about Viterbo and servant leadership. Viterbo's been around for well over 100 years. You'll see the video clip. And one of the reasons that I enjoy instructing for Viterbo, and the reason I've stayed with Viterbo for as many years as I have, is the concept of servant leadership. Really looking at how, as an educator, how as a person, you holistically see the community. And how Viterbo has infused itself into that entire community of Greater La Crosse. And I've taught for other universities, and it is a different feel with Viterbo, and I would say more of a family feel. I really have valued the people that I've worked with. There's a high emphasis on quality of instruction, and I think also compassion and following up with students, being very much with the emphasis of wanting students to succeed and have skills that are real world applicable. So my early memories of inclusion. So this is going to be a short one because my intro was long, maybe too long, but I attended a 4-story brick school that was 100 years old, and that was back when I was in elementary school. So this thing was old. It's gone now. It's torn down. But that school had no accessibility. So a couple stories of my thoughts of inclusion. Special education kind of came into the forefront when I was attending that school. It was a K-8 building, and I remember one day there was a yellow mobile home which was pulled up and parked outside of the back of the school, outside of the back door. No markings on this mobile home whatsoever, but there was a ramp that was built to get to the front door. And suddenly a couple of my classmates started to disappear. So this is maybe 3rd, 4th grade, for a few hours a day. And one of my classmates, John, was one of those who mysteriously would be gone. All right. Oh, single call. All right. So maybe that was John. He's like, hey, I made it back from the yellow mobile home. So I'm like, all right, 35 years later. But John would kind of disappear, and he would come back and he would have stickers, really cool stickers, and he'd always give me some. But I never knew where he went, and there were others. But we weren't told about special education or disability education awareness. That's just the way that it was, back then. I'm not saying it was a fault of the school or anything like that, but it was just, that's the way things were. And I didn't really learn until high school, more or less what special education was. And it wasn't until that time that I saw accommodations start to be made in the classroom, because any services back then were all pull out, all to the yellow mobile home. Hours a day, it would just kind of disappear. So there was a student with fragile bone disease, and he was older, one of the older students in the school. Very well respected, very highly respected by the younger students. And he was in a wheelchair, and the upper level classes were on the 4th floor, gymnasium, everything. Lunch was down on the 1st level. Students would take, 8th grade students, stronger students, one would take one side of the chair, one would take the other. They would zip him up this flight of stairs, and then the next flight of stairs, and the next and the next. And these were like sharp flights of stairs, and they would just race him up and race him down. And it worked. That's the way that was done. We had a playground which was blacktopped, and it was on a slope. And you had swings, and then there was this thing that had bars that you could climb up, and I think if you got high enough on it, you could be about 2 stories up in this. They had the giraffe that was really high, and the slides, and everything was all metal. But it was blacktop, so everything had blacktop underneath it, and it was the blacktop from like the 1930s and 40s, where it had the stones embedded in it. So every week you'd be losing the knees out of your jeans, because you'd take a wipe out of something off the swing or whatever, and that was the end of it. But nothing really was accessible in the standpoint of you could navigate the surface somewhat, but there wasn't any piece of equipment that was handicap or disability accessible. So you see that now in playgrounds, just the accessibility feature, and again, it wasn't there. So students, I don't even remember what my classmates with physical disabilities did during that time, or some of my classmates with intellectual disabilities, if they were accessing some of the equipment or not. I don't really remember, but I just know that what was out there then, nothing like that would be allowed today. Absolutely not. So today we have so much native technology, which I think is a plus to inclusion. And here's an example. A student with a disability has an iPad, has different apps on it, different software, maybe some predictive text software, and nobody thinks twice about it. That student has that. Other students have iPads all throughout the school. Now, when I was that age, when I was elementary age, if you had a specialized piece of equipment, it really stood out. It was pretty hefty, and usually only a couple people knew how to use it. It was very mysterious. And so it was one of those things too, where I think inclusion was challenging from a social aspect, as in other students did not understand what the technology devices were, the early technology devices to support students. And it was all, largely pretty sanitized. And what I mean by that is, it was black or silver or brown or whatever it was, and that's what it was. I had a friend, and we went to a Halloween party at the village hall, which was also like over 100 years old back then, and it's gone. And I remember, I hadn't really seen him outside of school, but I remember he had a shirt with a pocket, button shirt, and this huge pack in the front pocket, and it was for his hearing aid. And then of course the hearing aid was pretty substantial. It went over the ear, and I don't even know if it had something on this side, but I remember this huge pack of, a battery pack. And at that time, those things would only last so long, and that would be it. And then this cord, but you looked, and I mean, it stood out so much. And I just remember him being self-conscious about that in line, and especially a few others would look, or some of the other kids might ask questions, and not mean spirit, but again, that was just the way it was. And now you look. Kids have hearing aids, and what do they do? They say, "What color do you want? Do you want red? Do you want blue? Do you want a swirl pattern?" They're all coming out with stuff with like logos on it and things like that. So it's getting pretty contemporary. It's those things almost become a fashion. They have a fashion aspect built into them, and they're destigmatized. So and of course everything has become smaller. But those were a couple stories I wanted to share, because I think back to those when I work with students, now with disabilities, and see the different things, even the orthotics, for example, that students wear in their shoes, and to support their legs, or they can pick out different patterns and colors and so forth. But I think one of the biggest advances has been laptops and iPads, and smart boards. You can download notes automatically. Google Docs, so kids have access to that at home as well as school, and kids can work together. And you don't necessarily have to take books with you everywhere and carry them around in a big sack of books. Back then, there wasn't much for professional development for teachers, for educating how to work with students with disabilities, and again, not push in services, all pull out. Significant differences from today, and we're talking 35 years. I don't know if that makes me old, or what that is, but in the spectrum of where I think we've gone in schools with serving students with special needs, we've accomplished a ton in a short amount of time. The United States really deserves a lot of praise for that, and Japan's very, very much advanced also, and with universal design for learning. We'll talk about that later in class, but they even make sidewalks that have a little groove down the middle, and that groove is for a cane, so you always know where the center of the sidewalk is. Imagine that. So I already talked about my galaxies colliding, but just to reiterate, the terms in the WEAC article, mainstreaming and inclusion, those are different concepts. Mainstreaming, just think of it as being in physical location, and inclusion is when you are participating and engaged in both ways, in academic, social, whatever's happening in the classroom. And again, there's a number of schools which have gone full inclusion, which really have just gone full mainstream. I know a school that did that just recently. Teachers came back and started the year, and the superintendent had the speech and said, "We are going to be full inclusion this year," and nobody had any preparation for it. And the reason it was being done is because the school's growing, district was growing, they needed more classrooms, so they were freeing up the special education classrooms, and then the special education teachers would come in and serve students in the regular education classroom setting. So not necessarily a bad idea, but no preparation at all for that. So you have to have professional development with regular education, special ed, how to work together, then also schedule-wise, common planning time. That wasn't thought about. It was a disaster. They did get it worked out the second year, and move forward, because it was a good concept. It was just delivered in a really bad way. So I'm trying to imagine sitting there as a teacher, and the superintendent gives that announcement, and I'd be like, "You got to be kidding me!" So that can't be happening this fast. I don't know how to co-teach. I've got where my materials and my things, and so yeah, that's pretty much it. This is week 1. No shout-outs this week because I'm filming this ahead of time, but once we get into the next video, then I will start to do some shout-outs. Before I leave, I just want to mention one thing. It's a difference, and you hear the words tolerance and acceptance. They're not the same. And you hear these programs of teach tolerance. Teaching tolerance is a bottom level effort, meaning that acceptance is where you want to be. If you're tolerant, you're not making an effort to learn about somebody or their culture, or their interest, if their needs, and then having them open yourself up so they can ask those questions. And it's like, it's okay if they're over there and I'm over here. I'm fine with that. That's tolerance. And we have these teach tolerance campaigns. And it's like, no, don't go there. I mean, we're better than that. We are acceptance. And acceptance is understanding. And acceptance doesn't mean agreement. You don't have to agree with somebody else and their position, but you need to understand that, that person, that position, so you can make so you're informed. We see this all the time in politics. But it doesn't mean you have to agree, but at least be informed. And you can say, I don't agree with that, or whatever. Or there's ranges of, I agree with some of that, but some of that I don't agree with, or whatever it is. But that's one of the things too with acceptance. People also tie that in, well, if I accept, then I have to agree. And it's like, no, you can disagree. And it's okay. It's okay to disagree. But we all treat each other, with respect, and I think taking the time to understand and to learn about people, to be informed. But teach tolerance, that to me is a campaign that needs to go away. And it is acceptance, because teaching tolerance is a basal. It's right at the bottom. So, all right, Module 1, summer, great times, and hey, let's end this so you can get out and enjoy the weather.